Alrighty, welcome back to day 3 of our rookie tiered top 3 tiers breakdowns. Today, last day, we have wide receivers. We're not doing tight ends because Tyler said that he hates tight ends. So
Whoa,
he
whoa, a
actually didn't
lot of
say
heat
that. He
on me
didn't say
here.
that. So yet again, Tyler's back, and I need to point this way, right? Okay, I think, or I don't know, whatever way I'm pointing. Doesn't matter. We're breaking right into it. So you've heard the quarterbacks and the running backs the last 2 days, and then as you were hearing this, the wide receivers will be weighing in today, so we'll be interested to see how a lot of those play out. So let's just hop right into it right now. Top two are the same, but they're a little bit tiered different. Obviously, you can see on the side of the screens, I have CeeDee Lamb, Jerry Jeudy, and Rager in my tier one, where Tyler just has Lamb alone in his tier one.
Yeah.
So I mean, I don't really like placing, like I said, these in like set spots because Lamb could land on
Yeah.
play Team X, and then regular could land on Team X, and obviously we could change it. But I think receivers are a little differing, as in talent weighs in a little more than landing spot for me. You saw that with like AJ Brown or like a DK Metcalf last year, like Terry McLaurin. Those things you can kind of separate without the opportunity. So, CeeDee Lamb, break them down for me.
Yeah, so very, very solid receiver. I think he's the number one. I think this year specifically, he separated himself from Jeudy. Jeudy had an excellent sophomore year. If he could have came out last year, I would have loved for him to, but obviously with NCAA rules, you can't do that. But Jeudy kind of declined this year. It's why I give Lamb a little bit of an edge with a really with a basically a downgrade at quarterback. I think most people can agree to. I think Lamb being able to take this giant step over Jeudy gives him higher draft capital. I think there's a chance that Jeudy still may be drafted over Lamb, but I think Lamb's the better receiver. Very, very great in space. And even with a poor quarterback, can still function very highly on an offense.
Yeah, so you look at like their breakout ages and their dominators and kind of the benchmarks. These are all from Player Profiler. Kind of the benchmarks you look for in, I guess, like predictiveness, you could say. Obviously, it's not like super set in stone with how they turn out, but in terms of, I think, like a good number, usually you want less than 20, sub 20 breakout age. Breakout age is when you're a dominator. There's two different ways to look at it. Some do 30, but it's actually like 20% is kind of like what Player Profiler does for dominators. So that's like your total team yards and touchdowns divided by the team's total yards and touchdowns. So CeeDee Lamb is a 19.4 breakouts, automatically checks out that sub 20 box. Is a
Yeah.
dominator of 38.1%. Judy's is 19.4, similar. And these could be like 19.41 versus 19.48. Like if they're not like on the same day they broke out type thing, it's just kind of based off their birthday, obviously, and like the point in the season. But they're both sub 20 is basically what you can check off there. However, CeeDee Lamb kind of showed that more playmaking ability when the play broke down, as Oklahoma was not that good, not as good as Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, I mean, that makes sense. It's just like it's common knowledge. So Jeudy didn't really have to work as hard for his touchdowns and his plays, I feel like, as Lamb did. Lamb ranked first in this class in yards after contact, not yards after catch, but after the first initial point of contact, fourth in the nation, first in this class. Whereas Jeudy really wasn't high up at all on that chart. I didn't really get his exact number. But really, to me, there really is no like huge gap. Like I said, like it's just kind of like up in the air, I think. And either
Mm-hmm.
one of these guys is going to help you tremendously on your fantasy teams and your rookie drafts. On NFL teams, they're alpha receivers, I think, for whatever team they land on. Kind of touching into my last one on tier one, I have Jalen Rager. For me, I don't want to say this is like a personal choice or like a fanboy choice. I just think that is strictly off talent. He checks off all the boxes. Obviously, we'll see where landing spot lands on. Breakout age 95th percentile at 18.7. So he not only hit the sub 20, but he hit the sub 19. Dominator was the 74th percentile. And the knock with him is that his stats were down last year, and
Yeah.
rightfully so. Their quarterback was a true freshman, Max Dugan. Actually, I didn't play against him in high school, but we could have if we won the playoff game. We would have played him. He went to Lewis Central, I think, in Iowa, school up there. So he's a really good prospect. He had a ton of offers, but I mean, it's a true freshman in the Big 12 and one of the biggest conferences. Obviously, the defense quality wasn't that great, but just like the overall pressure, 59.8% of his targets were deemed catchable by Sports Info Solutions. So for every, say, 10 balls thrown, a little bit under 6 of those were deemed like you can actually catch these. So that just kind of showed how bad the quality of targets were. And Rager still produced an okay season. I don't want to say it was anything great. You have him down at your wide receiver 4, you could say, but in your tier 3, is there kind of like a reasoning why you have him down in there?
Well, I think a lot of things have to go to capital with him. I think he has the ability, like what the Chiefs did last year, where they reached for Mecole. I think he has the ability to go fairly high because of his speed, and with obviously the way NFL is changing, and the need for speed on offenses. I think he'll be very highly drafted, but I want to see that first. Obviously his numbers weren't great, but I chalk that up the situation more than anything else. I think he's a really, really great receiver, great in space, and I definitely think he has the ability, but capital is what's concerning me. I don't really think he can dominate with a bad offense, as we saw in stats from TCU
Yeah.
this year. Unlike Lamb and Judy, I think he's going to struggle a little bit when put on a weaker team per se. Now he can go to a great team, and obviously he'll start flying up draft boards, but he won't do as well with a poor team than I believe Judy and Lamb can do.
Yeah, I could see that. I think you can kind of consider, and obviously the teams are better than TCU, but I think you can kind of share a similar reasoning with it, kind of like a Terry McLaurin. Like obviously he had a really good season, but his season wasn't like really really good. Like, you know what I'm saying? It was good like in the terms of he broke out at Washington and for the Redskins, kind of set his name out there as the wide receiver 1, but it's not like he was winning you fantasy championships type of season. Yeah, I guess you could. The big thing with Rager, I think now is the combine will tell. People are saying he's going to run a sub 4.3. People have been making bets that him versus Ruggs, who's going to run faster. He's going to test out through the roof. He's just an athlete. So we'll kind of have to see how, like most of these guys, kind of what teams buy in where. I kind of envision him like the end of round 1, like a Saints or like a Packers or some type of team maybe trading back up or maybe snagging him and kind of solidifying that wide receiver 2 on their team.
Mm-hmm.
We'll move on now. I guess we don't need to do Jerry Jeudy because that's your tier 2, but also in your tier 2, you have Laviska Shenault. I have him in there in my tier 2 along with Justin Jefferson and T. Higgins. So Laviska Shenault, we'll just start with him. So basically he got injured this year. It's kind of, if you're not really like following it and you just see like the stats, you know that it was not that good of a season for him. He was projected, I think, at the start of the year by a lot of guys as the wide receiver 1 in this class. Very, very, very athletic, like non-prototype receiver. He's just a very big playmaker. He's big. He kind of reminds me of like a Jalen Rager play style, but kind of has the body of like Alshon Jeffrey. It's kind of like how I kind of like to mix it in with him. But the big thing with him is, like I said, low stat season. Steven Montez, not a very good quarterback. He was okay, but it was not. It was kind of like a TCU situation. Out of his 764 yards, 425 of them came after contact. To kind of put it in perspective how bad the situation was he was in. So he had to create over half of those yards just himself, which is not – that doesn't mean like the offense is bad in general, but that just shows how really, really good he is with the ball in his hands. He was using the backfield quite a bit, like as a running back. I think he threw a pass or two in a couple games his junior year. Just a very utilized utility type receiver. And like I said, he was injured, but he still maintained 110 wide receiver rating via Sports Info Solutions, which was kind of in that like 20 to 30 range for receivers.
Yeah.
Break down why you think Shenault is ahead of like Rager, Higgins, and Jefferson.
Yeah, well, I just think body size, flexibility in an offense. It's kind of crazy. We see normally these guys that can run the ball, throw it, play wide receiver, play in the slot, play everywhere on the field. Normally, we're seeing a lot smaller in size. They're trying to tuck away these people in their offensive system. But I mean, 6'2", 220. He is not someone you're going to hide. I believe he has a really, really good chance at being very successful almost immediately in the NFL. Only issue, obviously, is there's some injury concerns. His injury this year was very much not put out in the open. I did some digging. It was a core injury. Kind of backtracked him a little bit. Obviously, would have loved to see those numbers go up, 4 touchdowns only, but chalk that up to injury and a poor team. I think you get him on a solid offense. All these receivers on a solid offense can do a lot of damage, but I think it would really, really benefit Shenault to go on a team with already an established wide receiver on the other end. Can help him be very dominant as a receiver. And when looking at him, I saw a little bit of hints, and I know this is obviously an extreme, definitely a ceiling comp here. I saw a little bit of Brandon Marshall, the ability to dominate one-on-one, Extremely physical wide receiver for his size. Obviously, Brandon Marshall is about 3 inches taller, so not a great comparison in the size, but domination on the field is really, really big for me, especially when you're going against higher quality corners and more physical players on the defensive end.
Yeah, and he is kind of along with that injury. He is going to run the 40, but he is not going to do any of the other drills. We found that out today, just based off Twitter, which I kind of figured because I think he wants to prove what he can do injured in terms of the 40. Because I think people are just kind of like knocking his speed, I guess you could say. They're not necessarily like saying he's slow or anything, but I think that speed, that 40 score, that 10-yard burst, that 20-yard burst is really going to help propel him up the draft boards. Personally, if I'm drafting a team, I would rather have, if Chenault can run good, I would rather have Chenault than Reagor, just off the dynamic score. Obviously, it's not really fantasy, but that's just like overall football in general. I'd just rather have a player that can do more. And I know if you put Reagor in the backfield, I'm sure he could do it, but I think Chenault just brings that instant boost to a contender to kind of work in that wide receiver 2-3 to eventually be their wide receiver 1.
Yeah.
So now I guess this is kind of rounding out my tier 2 and sort of starting your tier 3. I have Justin Jefferson and T. Higgins. I'm a big fanboy of the Justin Jefferson. I don't want to put him at the wide receiver 1, but I definitely think he has the talent for sure. He's just not as much of an athlete as the other ones, and that's just anyone can tell you that. Like Jefferson's not going to put up the combine numbers that Lamb, Judy, Reagor, even like Chenault and Ruggs are going to put up. It's just the way he is. He's just a pure receiver and not necessarily a athlete. So he was number 1 in receiver rating via Sports Info Solutions. He put up 1,540 yards on 18 touchdowns on 111 catches. Yes, that was a product of Joe Burrow. Yes, that was a product of the LSU offense, but I think he's just so good at what he does, which is a huge slot receiver, that I just think it's too good to be true for the NFL to me. 6'3", 192. Those are, we'll find out tomorrow with the like legit sizes, but that was, I think, probably, I'm assuming, national championship time when he got weighed via Player Profiler. But if he stays like 6'3", if he can get up to 200 and still runs like a 4.5, I think that, I don't know. I think the sky's the limit for him if he's going to play the slot in the NFL. I could envision him like on the Packers, on the Saints, the Patriots could snag him at the end of round 1. I just think
New Orleans.
Yeah, I know. That's what I'm saying. Like, I just think like it's too good to be true with where he's at, because he's going to fall to a team that's ready to win automatically, and he's just that safety blanket for like an aging quarterback like Brady, Rodgers, Breeze, and this maybe his final year. So I think what kind of puts you Higgins over Jefferson per se, where I'm Jefferson over Higgins?
Well, so we'll get into Higgins in just a second, but for Jefferson, I really like his contested catching. Very, very slot dominant. Obviously, you said. I think he has the ability to stretch a defense, can play anywhere in the wide receiver positions, and quarterbacks can lean on him. He's able to make plays. He doesn't have to rely on going deep every play. He's not a middle of the field kind of guy. Sorry, not like a medium range throwing or deeper kind of guy. You can throw short routes to him, deeper, whatever you got to use for him. He's really, really good for quarterbacks to lean on, get a bunch of yards, is what we saw with Burrow a lot. I broke down the Florida film for Justin Jefferson and just picking apart on just short plays. And eventually those just start building up for a defense, just continuing to get yards. And he's just a very, very talented slot receiver. Can translate well in the NFL. Even with blow up in stats this year, I think he still can be a solid wide receiver too, coming out of the gates next year.
Yeah, and I think that your blow up in stats, you mentioned that people might not be onto him, and I think that's kind of why I drew into him at first, because like I didn't really like realize how good of a season he had, like just watching the games, because Jamar Chase is the one who took over, but he was still able to do that with the 50 plus catches that Allaire had, with Terrence Marshall, who's a better prospect than Chase and Jefferson coming into college. It was just, I don't know. We don't really need to touch on him too more, because I think people kind of understand our values on him. T. Higgins, like you mentioned, 6'4", 216. Go ahead.
Yeah, works whole field, able to win contested. I mentioned contested catching a lot because of the importance of it when it comes into the NFL. You got to be physical. The NCAA to the NFL as far as cornerback aggressiveness, we could say, is remarkably different. A lot more scrappy cornerbacks in the NFL fighting for every single ball. You got to be able to win contested catches. It translates incredibly well into the NFL. And then being able to work the whole field for him is obviously vital as well. And he put up some solid stats this year, over 1,000 yards, put up 1,113 touchdowns, about 60 receptions. Really, really solid stuff out of Higgins. I think a little bit of a backseat to Ross. I think Justin Ross is going to be the number one wide receiver coming out next year, but I don't think he was completely hidden in that offense, and he could be very, very good for a team. Obviously, starting about a wide receiver 2 coming in, it would be really phenomenal stuff from him.
Yeah, I think he could be the biggest riser for me post combine. Like I said, 6'4", 216, sub 19 breakout age, 96 percentile at 18.6, 93rd percentile yards per reception at 19.8 in college. But like you said, physicality is a must in the NFL. We kind of saw that knockoff. I was listening to the Footballers podcast with Brandon Cooks, kind of like a little bit of why he fell off. Obviously, completely different type of receiver, but like you can just see that drop off when you're not able to get open in the one-on-one coverage, which is what Higgins is going to draw. Because he's not going to play. I mean, he can play the slot by all means, but he's not going to be like your motion guy running the little like crossing routes. It's just not how he's going to play. He only caught 59 of 75 catchable targets via Sports Info Solutions. And I don't want to like be like, oh, that's why I don't like him. But if the ball's coming from Trevor Lawrence and you're playing in the ACC, I would think that the 59 out of 77, 75 would be like, I don't know. I feel like that'd just be a little bit better. But if he can run fast, if he can run a 4.5, I am all in.
Yeah.
And if he can, I'm going to watch his gauntlet very closely, because if he is just smooth with the way he runs through the gauntlet, I think it'll just be telling for him for sure. The only question I have about him is I don't know how high or low his stock's going to be. It's hard to gauge based off now because people are just doing random mock drafts. Obviously, you can go look at like the big name guys making mock drafts, but they have no clue. Like, how much more do they know than like we do type thing. I could see Higgins going as early as like the Bills and like the mid-teens, but I could see him falling all the way to end of day 2 just because teams might trade up and get their guys and they might just move down type thing. So he'll adjust after the combine, but then if he gets draft capital, I think he's up there with guys like Jefferson, Chenault, maybe even tier 1, because he is one of the best athletes that's come out the last 3 years just based off the numbers alone. And we've seen him play, especially the championship game when he had that one Moss catch that was a pass interference, but we don't need to talk about that.
Yeah, well, obviously, unlike last year where we saw a bunch of teams climb up for wide receivers we didn't even think should be valued in like day 2, teams are obviously knowing coming into this year there's so many good wide receivers in this class that they can afford to move on to the next days, exactly. Whether it be pushing guys that we think should be like day 1 guys or day 2 guys, going back, backtracking one whole day because of how many talented guys there are in this class. So don't be too discouraged if you see Higgins fall. Look for the landing spot. I think that's going to be most important. And that's really going to show how effective he can be almost immediately. I still think he can grow into a solid wide receiver, whether or not what team he goes to.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like a DK Metcalf situation like last year. You can kind of throw that out there. He was end of round 2 and everyone was like, oh, he can't do a 3-cone, and he fell all the way to the end of round 2. He sucks. And then you're like, oh, wait, he's the wide receiver 1 in Seattle. Like, it was just, yeah, like you said, we'll have full recaps or ranking recaps afterwards and all that to kind of give our final thoughts on it. But I think as of now, he has to be one of he's like on a teeter-totter, I guess you could say. Post-combine, post-draft, he can go way up or he can go way down. So I think it'll be exciting to see him progress.
Absolutely.
So your tier – I guess it'd be like your tier 4 kind of matches up with my tier 3. So we can just kind of dig into mine. So I have Tyler Johnson, Henry Ruggs, and KJ Hamler.
Okay.
It's tough because I love Tyler Johnson. The NFL does not. And I think everyone is on board. Every non-NFL player is on board with us, but every NFL guy is not on board with Tyler Johnson. So obviously he was not invited to the Senior Bowl. He was invited to the Shrine Bowl, but he backed out. He said he was going to focus on the combine. He did return for his 4th year in Minnesota last year to break I think it was the receiving record at Minnesota, and to obviously get his degree. So he was going to come out, well, not going to come out, but he was projected to come out last year I think he would have been, I don't even know, top 3 in last year's class. I think he's so good, but it's been so kind of I don't know. Like I just don't. Teams are just kind of leaving him in the dust. But we'll kind of break down his numbers here. Breakout age 19 on the dot, 90th percentile. Dominator 98th percentile at 57.2%. That is insane. Like, and I know it's Minnesota, but they had Rashad Bateman there. They had a really good year this year, but that's a cumulative dominator. So it was the past 3 years, he just I don't know, he just got in, stole the show in Minnesota. Now that's not saying much. They've only been really good this last year, but he's just a playmaker. College yards per reception, 82nd percentile, and demanded a 29.2% target share as a sophomore. So that is what guys like Judy and like Rager and them were putting up like this year. Obviously, it's a different school, but like just to put it in context, that's very elite. And the wide receiver. You watch the film. I'm sure you've watched film. It's
Yeah.
great. I mean,
I see, and this may hurt some people based on my comparison here, but I see him as a more hyped, maybe a little bit better Zay Jones, mainly because the quantity shown and all the stats compiling up and the reception totals, it gives me hints at like obviously he can dominate with a really I would say solidly good. I would say they're a pretty good offense. I think PJ Fleck did an incredible job with his team, rode the boat all day long. But I don't know. Because I obviously my mom went to East Carolina, so I watch their games whenever I can. I kind of get that same vibe with him where he can clearly dominate on a pretty good offense, but I want to see him when thrown onto a really good offense facing elite corners every single day in the NFL. So really, I'm kind of back burnering him. I want to see where he goes, how it's a fit. He's definitely a landing spot dependent kind of person with me, where like when Zay Jones came out and went to Buffalo, I had to jump off that train almost immediately.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's going to be the huge thing. That's kind of where everyone's at landing spot, whether that's late day 2, midday 2, or even day 3, which is not out of the question by any means. I don't think he's going to test like through the roof by any means because he's not like a huge athlete like Lamb and Judy are, but he's just a good overall football player. So we'll kind of see how that goes. Like I said, I don't really like making rankings set in stone. I like doing the tiers, but even then it's I don't know. Like it's not like something I love doing. That's why we're really only doing it for like this week and just kind of
Yeah.
letting everyone else do it while we then recap it after the draft. Yeah, I think that's all we got to say about him. If you want to watch some dominant film, just go watch his film, and you'll be every single play. It's like Jamar Chase film, but in Minnesota. To me, is kind of how I compare it.
Mm-hmm.
Next guy, Henry Ruggs. Sadly, who the Broncos are probably going to take at pick 15. Not sadly, in terms of fantasy, which this show is about. Sadly, but in terms of overall football, I think it'll be beneficial. So he I'm going to say the fastest player in this class because he probably is. He today said that he's going to break the 40 record. Yeah, whatever. We're just going to move off that. But I still think Rager's going to run faster. I think Ruggs is going to run like a 4.27, 4.28. And yeah, that's fast. But here's the deal. He never broke out, never had over 1,000-yard season. I know it's Alabama. I know it's tough, but we see people do it all the time. Even the wide receiver 2s break out all the time, that type of thing. Players produce even though they're not the main guy at Alabama. He was at 83rd percentile in yards per reception, which that is good, but you'd think if he's so fast and such a good playmaker that he would have had more or a higher percentile. I don't know. I'm just not like I know he's going to downfield stretcher is good, but I'm just not like, oh my gosh, like he's going to be an elite wide receiver in the NFL. He kind of reminds me of like a less talented Deshaun Jackson, but like a more talented, I don't know, John Ross, you could say.
Yeah.
What do you think?
No, that's a pretty solid comparison. I don't know. It's not special to me. 7 touchdowns, 700 yards. I mean, if you have that speed, you should be at least eclipsing 1,000. I get the offense that you're in. But, it's hard because we played the game with Justin Jefferson. A lot of people have avoided playing this game with Ruggs where we're like, it's just a factor of Joe Brady and LSU.
Mm-hmm.
But why isn't it a factor for Henry Ruggs and Alabama and Nick Saban? I mean, there's a lot of talent and a lot of people to give the ball to, but I would have loved to see a little bit more out of him. I think he's just a factor of excellent guys around him. Obviously, if he gets thrown to Uh, Goodness gracious. I mean, maybe, and it's so hard because it's like, what team kind of replicates Alabama in the
Yeah,
NFL?
he's
I
not
mean,
making it past Philadelphia. Broncos will get him. Philadelphia will get him. Bills might. There's
and I
he's
don't want
gonna
to see
go
him on
round
those.
one.
Yeah, I don't want to see him on those teams. I mean, he's got to be in a situation where he's not the main guy everyone's looking at.
Mhm.
And if he is, I mean, I don't see him. I don't see him doing very well in the NFL, which is unfortunate. But I do think his speed will give him capital and opportunity, which we can we can look at very highly, at least here. Um, Teams will stick with him a little bit longer, but I don't know. I mean, he's just one of those guys. It's hard for me to want to buy into.
Yeah, the thing with him is he's going to be a great NFL player, I think, just because of the way he's going to be used. If he lands in the Broncos, I think that's huge considering that we got Pat Shermer. We're going to switch to a downfield play action stretching offense, which is what he would thrive in. It's just a red flag in terms of because obviously we're basing this off talent, overall prospects. We'll readjust after landing spot. I could easily see him being a tier two guy just if he goes to I don't know, say he goes to the Saints. Like he'd have to put him tier two.
Oh
Like you know
yeah.
what I'm saying? Like there's no way you could leave him out because then
Mhm.
it becomes talent, landing spot, and projection. Like we'll obviously break it down like I said, but it's just he is a good downfield stretcher, and that's about it. But if you had Deshaun Jackson's a good downfield stretcher, a good receiver, a good one-on-one playmaker. I it's just there's a red flag that I think everyone sees, and they're just kind of waiting to make assumptions about it.
Mhm.
So with that, we'll go on to the player that is not a red flag in KJ Hamler. Similar player, will probably run about a 4.27, same speed. He says he wants to run the record too, and he says he can. And I kind of believe in watching his film. I didn't really like I his name stood in the back of my head throughout the college football season, and then once I kind of got like heavy into like actually like looking at the stuff, he popped right off the page. Stats aren't that great, but he did have over 600 special teams yards in 2 seasons, which obviously could be like, well, he might not be the punt returner in the NFL, but that just shows the dynamic ability, the playmaking ability that he does have. I mean, if you're fielding a punt, you're catching the ball and you got to snap your fingers and go and make plays. So obviously, it just shows that his quick twitch is there. He's able to juke, spin, all that stuff. He's just able to make a play on the spot, which I think is huge, especially for an undersized guy like him. I don't know what he's going to weigh in. I'd be what tomorrow? Yeah, or today, I guess when you're hearing this. He's 5'9", 174 via Player Profiler. That is very small. However, I don't want to say we haven't seen size not or small size work in the NFL because you look at a guy like Julian Edelman, he's right around that size and he's thrived for X amount of years. So I think Hamler is a discount Henry Ruggs to me. Um, every part of me wants the Broncos to get him in round two. I think he will. I don't think he can get into round one, even if he blows up the combine, but I think he's kind of stuck in that. Not stuck, but I think he's kind of set in that early round two to mid round two just because he is that next Henry Ruggs. Because they're really the only two speedy burner type receivers in this class.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you could throw in Rager there as well with
Yeah.
speedy wide receivers, but I mean, his speed's great. I think he's a big electric playmaker, but again, another one of those guys. This time specifically focusing on his size that I want to see. I want to see how it begins to translate in the NFL. And obviously, that's not like immediate. Do I draft him in rookie drafts kind of content out of me? But it's hard to judge a player like this without knowing his situation, what his coaches are going to want to do with him in that situation, and see if his size is going to translate, because we don't see too many guys
No.
successfully do what he does with his size. I want to see it in the NFL. I want to see how it functions.
Yeah, and I think you hit it right on the head with we'll just have to kind of wait and see. However, I don't think landing spot's going to matter a huge amount for him, just because it's the way the prospect he is, the prototype receiver he is. But I think he'll be value dependent or ADP dependent for sure if we're on or off him. So that is rounding out our top three tiers. Mine more in depth than his, just how it is right now. Obviously that'll change. So if you liked this series, thumbs up, subscribe, let us know how we did. Next week, me, Tyler, and other team member Dwayne, we're going to be breaking down just an overall combine recap, and then we're going to kind of kick that off into free agency content and then sort of not pivoting away from rookie content, but just kind of shifting more to redraft, which is what this channel is based
Yeah.
on. So thank you so much for listening. Tyler, thank you. My point,
Yeah.
wait, no, that way. And then, yeah, let us know how you feel about it. Subscribe and like, comment about Tyler's shades down below, and we'll catch you next time.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.